vampire standing on the roof said, "The smell of dark mana is very strong. Did they kill each other because of the fragment of the immortal king? What a pity, he wanted to destroy the fragments once they were fully matured." Then he smirked and said that he had no idea who stole it. But he knew where it was going. He folded his arms and said, "So it won't be difficult to find the thief." At this time, Heinz, not understanding, asked, "A vampire?" Diana, still crying, answered that it was, including the Varkalax. All the organizations are run by vampires. Even if he escaped the city, none of them would survive. She desperately wiped the tears from her face and said that they were doing their best to hold on. Day after day, they were trying their best. Then she covered her face with her hands and said, "Damn, she and her little brother will get eaten anyway." The Avatar grabbed her face and shouted at her to come to her senses. If her words were true, they didn't have much time. Did she know where they could have taken her brother? She hesitantly replied that she didn't know if he was going to help her. Going on alone was just dangerous. Heinz smiled and told her not to worry. He knew how to fight back against these scoundrels. He thought the mission to save the unlucky girl was beginning. Some time later, some bandits were playing a card game in a tavern. One of them threw some silver coins on the table and said, "All in." The bandit looked at him with a smirk and asked, "Hey, where did a debtor like him get such a big amount of money?" He replied with a smile that he robbed some idiot this morning and made a good profit. At that moment, Heinz swung open the doors to the tavern with a blow of his hand. One of the bandits stood up from his seat and walked up to him with a smile. His comrade said, "What kind of idiot is this? Who is he?" The bandit stopped him with a hand gesture and asked him to wait. Then he put his hand on the Avatar's head and, pointing his finger at him, said, "Kid. So this is the idiot they robbed. Did he come to give them more money?" He laughed and asked, "Did he want to share with them?" Near the entrance to the building, to the left of the wall, right on the vampire sign, drops of blood were dripping, and a guard was kneeling, leaning his broken head against the wall. The bandit asked what happened to the guards. Did he give him a coin or what? Heinz said that he would not ask a second time where he took the child. The bandit pointed his finger at him and indignantly asked, "What? Is he crazy? Does he even know who he is dealing with?" At that moment, the Avatar stabbed the bandit in the throat with a knife and said that he knew exactly what kind of scum these people were. Those who interfere with families to satisfy their selfish greed. Scum! He thought he had dealt with one. There were still two left. The bandits rushed towards him. One of them swung his knife and shouted, "What the hell is this guy?" His comrade shouted, "Does he even know where he is? He needs to die." Heinz also swung his knife and thought, "He has durability. And he has excellent super skills. He can do it." The Avatar attacked one of the bandits, while the other tried to stab the knife into the exposed part of his body. The bandit, his hands shaking, struggled to move the knife forward, wondering what this was. Heinz stabbed him with the knife and thought, -2. Then he moved aside and said with a smile, "A bulletproof vest made in Korea, bastard." The bandit behind him swung his weapon, but the Avatar turned around in a sharp motion and used his magical barrier. The bandit exclaimed in surprise, "A magic barrier? Where did he get such a magic tool?" At that moment, a knife pierced his chest, and the Avatar thought, -3. Then he looked at the magic items on his belt and thought, good thing he brought so many magic tools with him. He looked around and sighed, is it all over? Did he bring too many magic tools? He didn't even use half of them. At that moment, a few more bandits came down the stairs, and looking down, one of them shouted, "What's all the commotion about?" "Huh! What kind of guy is that?" Heinz looked at them uncertainly and thought, damn. His long tongue got him into trouble again. There were screams coming from the building, 6, 7, 8. After a while, Heinz stood in the middle of the fallen bandits with a knife in his shoulder, breathing heavily. He asked, "Why are there so many?" He lost count. He then pulled the weapon out of his shoulder and said that he forgot about it while he was fighting. He then turned to the bandit lying on the ground and put his foot on his head and shouted, "Hey big guy, where is the boy they captured today?" He asked indignantly, "Does he think he's just going to tell him everything? He's an outsider, isn't he? He doesn't know who's behind him, but he's going to regret it. His boss will be arriving soon, and when he sees this, it will be the end of him." The Avatar thanked him for the information and then swung his foot and said that he'd better worry about his own life. The next moment, a piercing scream of pain was heard. After a while, Heinz opened the door to the room and seeing the boy sitting on the ground, asked, "Is he Eren?" Eren, shaking with fear, grabbed his head and begged for mercy. The Avatar leaned towards him, kneeling on one knee, extended his hand and told him not to be afraid. His sister asked him to save him. Aaron asked, does he know his sister? At this time, a vampire in the form of a bat flew to the place. Hines told Aaron that it was true, he would explain everything to him as soon as they left here, but first they needed to get out. The vampire had already landed on the window of this building and, turning into a human form, asked who he was. How dare he touch his food in his restaurant? Hines was horrified, he felt a presence behind him, and the vampire continued while he was eating? Is he from an oath of disobedience? Hines took the boy by the shoulder and thought, a vampire. The vampire asked, or maybe he is this boy's brother? He knows what happens to those who challenge them. The avatar smirked and answered him. He is just an outsider who was robbed by his rabble. He covered Aaron with his hand and said that it was pure chance that he helped this boy. The vampire pointed his hand at him and said, really? How boring. He added that he preferred to eat boys, and they would die here. Hines covered Aaron with his body and shouted at him to run. At that moment, the vampire released a magic projectile from his hand, which destroyed everything around him. The avatar, holding the boy close to him, lay on the floor and spilled alcohol and breathed heavily. Then he sat up and said, the smell of alcohol. Is that a barrel? Then he patted the boy on the head and asked, Aaron, is he okay? Is that really it? And he said that this was his last chance, he should hurry and run outside. The vampire landed next to him and said dodged, so he was faster than he thought. A great warm-up before dinner. The next moment, he swung his hand with long claws. The avatar pushed Aaron towards the door and shouted at him to run. It doesn't matter what happens, as long as he doesn't come back. Then, with the help of the sword, he tried to repel the vampire's attack, but gritting his teeth, he noticed the claws that had become even longer. They pierced his body, and the vampire said, he has a strong body, impressive regeneration abilities. Hines clenched his teeth in pain and thought that the difference in strength was too great. The vampire licked his lips and said, the dish was not planned, but it looks like it will become a real delicacy. The avatar thought that if he did not want to play, he would have died a long time ago. He can't just sit back. Then he swung his hand at him, but the vampire cut off his hand with his long claw and said, oh dear. He thought that he needed to scrape his bones a little before eating. He lifted the avatar in the air, impaled on his claws, and said that this is where his senseless resistance ends. He will pay for this. Then he approached his neck. Hines thought, if there is a difference in strength, they should just die. At that moment, he released the ring from his mouth, setting everything around him on fire, and the vampire said, what is this? A fire magic tool? Has he been hiding this all this time? The avatar thought as he was thrown to the ground, he saw the alcohol spilling on the floor, and thought of how to take advantage of this situation. The vampire screamed in fear, crazy idiot. He doesn't want to die with him, right? If the fire touches the ground, he will burn alive. He has to get out. Then he cut the avatar's body with his claw. He laughed and said, fragile piece of flesh, but the next moment, Hines hit him with all his might with his head, causing him to fly to the side, and screamed that he himself said that he has a strong body and good regeneration ability. He is a bit of a tough delicacy. The vampire screamed in horror, no. Seeing the avatar approaching him, he shouted for him to stop. But the next moment, an explosion thundered through the building. Hines, engulfed in flames, lay on the floor saying, wow, impressive, to think he survived. He realized that being strong can also be difficult. At that moment, he realized that the Help the Unlucky Girl mission had been successfully completed. Outside the burning building, Diana, hugging her brother, looked at the raging flames. She exclaimed, Uncle! At that time, a system window appeared in front of the protagonist, where it was written that Avatar Hines had died. The avatar will be reborn in 7 days. Some time later, Diana was cleaning a man's shoes, and when the shoes sparkled in the sun, the man said, that's enough. She agreed with him. The man walked on and said that he put the money on the table. Diana thanked him with a smile, and then, wiping the sweat from her forehead, sighed heavily. The avatar came up behind her and asked if it was okay to ask her a question. She turned around with a smile and said, yes. Of course. Please, he must sit down. She then asked in surprise, huh? Her face lit up with happiness, and she hugged the avatar, happily exclaiming, Uncle! He's okay! Hines too smiled, hugging her back, and said, of course he's okay. Does he look like someone who can die so easily? None of this was true. However, the avatar really did die this time. The protagonist said that he would only be reborn in a week. Diana would be very nervous. Should I create a new avatar? He pointed his hand forward and said, from now on, he is Heinz 2. General Skill Acceleration, note Song Hyun's third avatar. He thought that he was in a hurry to use the avatar. She wouldn't notice that he was different, right? She was sure that he was him because their souls were the same. Diana looked up at him and said that he couldn't come here anymore. The vampires would be looking for him. The avatar patted her head and told her not to worry, he had decided everything. He thought that he had the immortal King Hans on his side, so the vampires were no longer a problem. After a while, Heinz 2 sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the system window, thinking. He said that he would have to wait 10 days for the interdimensional transfer to complete. It would take longer than he thought, but it was okay. At that moment, Virik burst into the room, breaking through the wall, and grabbed him by the neck. He slammed his head against the wall and asked, was this his doing, right? The tracks from the forest lead here. The avatar thought, vampires. Have they figured everything out yet? The vampire said that the outsider was under the jurisdiction of his slain vampire. Heinz 2 felt like he was being strangled, but he couldn't muster the strength to fight back. He clenched his teeth and thought, what a monster. Virik approached his neck and said that he did not feel the aura of dark magic and did not smell the blood of his king. The avatar glanced at him out of the corner of his eye and asked, what is he talking about? He does not understand him. He was just sleeping. Virik smiled and asked, really? He does not understand? He says he does not understand? Then he pressed the avatar to himself and sank his teeth into his neck, saying that then he will ask again, but slowly, it will not work to lie. Heinz 2 shook his whole body and thought that this is madness. Why is this happening to him again? The system window that appeared said that the entity's appearance changed to a vampire. Virik stepped aside and said again. A notification appeared in the system window that he received a special skill, the Legacy of Little Blood. The super regeneration skill was replaced with regeneration. The vampire, shrouded in an overwhelming aura, asked, was he truly not involved in the vow of disobedience? The avatar felt the pressure and authority emanating from the higher vampire, and his blood seemed to scream for submission. He answered, yes, Lord Virik, he is just a simple traveler. Despite this, he knew that he could ignore the instinct to obey, as the center of the mind acted as a kind of filter, blocking it. Virik turned away and said, was he mistaken? He should follow him, they have important business. Heinz 2 thought with a smile, okay, he will go and get some information. Soon they found themselves at the main office of the Azantu branch, the Varkalak clan. When they entered, the vampires present greeted Virik with respect. They turned their attention to the avatar and asked, what is this? New blood? The vampire covered her mouth with her hand and said, what was he thinking? Accept such scum? At that moment, Rose Alicia ran up to Heinz 2 joyfully, holding a glass of liquid in her hand. She grabbed his hand and exclaimed, hello. Little blood after all this time? Smiling sheepishly, she introduced herself as Rose Alicia and asked what his name was. He looked at her and thought, what kind of drunkard is this? He then replied that his name was Heinz. Rose Alicia handed him a glass of liquid and said that he shouldn't be so rude, they were the same minor blood, weren't they? Here, freshly squeezed blood. He should drink it. He took the glass in his hand and thought that maybe he should drink it to avoid suspicion. After taking a small sip, he felt a strong thirst even through the filter of the center of the mind. He thought that just drinking was dangerous, he would block the taste and smell and then drink it. When he drank the contents to the last drop, he said, delicious. Rose Alicia ran her finger along his cheek with a smile, and said that she liked him. If he were a human, she would suck out all his blood to the last drop. He laughed awkwardly and asked, she called him a minor blood, what does that mean? Rose Alicia thoughtfully put her finger to her chin and said, huh? He doesn't know anything about vampire ranks, does he? A minor blood is like a knight among humans, and a pure blood is an aristocracy. For example, Lord Virik. The clan of leaders is known as the true blood. And then there is the sacred blood. Well, it is something like God. The avatar asked, God? She answered, their prophet, and the one they must obey completely. At this moment, Virik, standing on the second floor, banged his spoon on his glass several times and called for attention. He said that it seemed like everyone was gathered, so they could get down to business. The fragments of the immortal king disappeared. Parita, the pure-blood vampire, adjusted a strand of her hair, watching what was happening. Virik said that it was determined that they were last transported to the city, but at some point they disappeared without a trace. The pure-blood vampire Teopole folded his arms over his chest, and Vierick suggested that perhaps they had already entered the city. Heinz, looking up, asked in surprise, the fragments of the immortal king? Rosalicia, looking at him, sighed and asked, does he not know? The dark mages and